This is perhaps a slightly unusual picture to look at when you're thinking about submarines and diving and that sort of thing. But I think Charles Kingsley's book, The Water Babies, which was published in the 1860s, it kind of spoke to a desire or a fascination among Victorian people with the sea and with the undersea world. And in his book, he's talking about, well, the story of a chimney sweep who's kind of magically reborn. But he's talking about the transformation of humans into a sort of aquatic life form. And I know that's one of the sort of major themes of Aquatopia, is this notion of this kind of transformation. But at the same time, 1860s, if you think the American Civil War was raging, and submarines were involved in that war. This was the first time really that submarines were used by naval forces. And diving, deep sea diving and exploration were becoming, were very sort of topical. The first diving suits were invented by a German inventor who fought at Waterloo and then moved to London. Augustus Siebel was his name. In 1837 he patented the full diving suit that we know today. This sort of massive metal structure which couldn't be more different really than the sort of image of the baby in the clamshell. This was the sort of fantasy of aquatic, and the reality was this kind of giant spaceman-like figure under the water. And so 1837 onwards, increasing numbers of divers were going down into the sea, usually to work in ports or off ships to salvage or to conduct repairs. But in the imagination, this was taking hold, and again it was 1870, just a few years later, that 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea was published. And again, it's all sort of connected in a fascination with the ocean as a place previously only imagined, but now people are going out there and actually becoming aquatic and discovering it for themselves. So this pair of diving boots was produced by Sieber Gorman, the company that Augustus Sieber set up, which for more than a century was on Westminster Bridge Road, just across from the Houses of Parliament. And they're fantastic boots. You can imagine them, I mean, they have a very Victorian look about them, and they sort of date, as the whole of the kind of early history of diving and submarines dates from, obviously, the pre-digital age, a time when everything had to be manufactured in the simplest way, and when all technical equipment had to be controlled by humans constantly. So, for example, on board a submarine, even in the Second World War, everything was done by the crew. Every measurement had to be gathered, everything that happened had to be controlled by crew members. There was no automation. And so a submarine was a sort of mass of pipes and cables and tubes and dials and taps and so forth. Meanwhile, the divers went around in the same way in 1945 as they had in 1845, with this very cumbersome equipment that required several people to help them put it on, and in which they were more or less helpless on land. So the boots, which were obviously worn, this pair has obviously been worn many times by divers, is a wonderful relic of what it was like in those days before Jacques Cousteau and the lovely light frogman scuba diver. So this is a picture I know well because I recently wrote a book called Ravilious Submarine, which charts the creation of one of the most remarkable series of prints made during the Second World War, a series of 10 lithographs produced by artist Eric Ravilious. And Ravilious was a landscape painter and designer. He did a lot of industrial design, including work for Wedgwood. And in 1939, when he was in his mid-30s, he was appointed a war artist and sent to work for the Admiralty in the Royal Navy with the rank of captain in the Royal Marines. Now, Ravilious was a very kind of free-spirited individual, didn't particularly relish military life and wasn't too good with the discipline and so on. But he did really like working alongside sailors. He first went aboard a destroyer in Norway and just loved being around the naval people, and did a tremendous amount of work up in Norway during the summer, where he was very inspired by the midnight sun and spent basically 24 hours a day on deck painting. His resulting pictures are beautiful, but they're not particularly military. And when they were shown in the National Gallery, he was criticised for focusing on the decorative quality of the scenes that he saw. So I think because of that, in the summer of 1940, he decided to try and get closer to the heat of the action, and went aboard a submarine, a training submarine in Portsmouth, and for a month travelled on training missions with the sailors, with the trainee submariners, and then produced this series of lithographs. And this one is known as Submarine Dream, I think because it has this slightly strange quality in the way that it kind of shifts between different planes, if you like. At the top you've got the submarine, which suggests to me, anyway, the kind of post-war world of Jacques Cousteau and brightly lit blue water of undersea filmmaking. But this was something that was in the future when Ravilious was working. Nobody at that time had ever shown other people what it was really like underwater, because you really couldn't see. And there was no way to record what you saw. So this is a sort of a fantasy on his part, and he's changed the turbulence of the propeller into light. And then within this kind of, he's got these circles or sort of nimbuses of light. So you've got this one here, this oval, and then the yellow oval here. And within that, the turret of the submarine, and it's drawn very realistically. We're sort of invited to descend into the mysterious world of the wartime submarine, like Alice going down the rabbit hole. And it was a very strange world. Submariners lived in a way that other sailors and naval people didn't. They had their own routines and rituals, and lived in this very confined space, all very close together, living where they worked. And here he's sort of introduced a few of the subjects that are going to be in the rest of the lithographs. On the left here we see a plainsman, and his job was to keep the submarine level, which is very important, particularly when they were travelling at periscope depth just below the surface of the water, and needed to be kept out of sight so that the captain could raise the periscope and look around without being detected. And then he's got a naval anchor here, and then the diving helmet. And Ravilious had already depicted divers on several occasions. He was very intrigued by deep sea divers. And I think that one of the reasons that he liked this image is because he's kind of referring back to Salvador Dali's famous appearance at the 1936 Surrealist exhibition, when he opened the exhibition wearing a deep sea diving suit that he'd hired from Seba Gorman, and then attempted to give a speech one year and suffocated and had to be rescued by an assistant armed with a pair of pliers. One of the other little girls in the series shows a diver, and this was obviously something Ravilious was intrigued by, and not that I think he ever went diving himself, but the idea of this person who puts on a suit and goes down into the depths to explore the mysterious depths was, I think, something that intrigued him a great deal. Certainly the submarines that he saw and the submarine he travelled in inspired a wonderful series of prints that remain, all these years after the war, one of the most striking and lasting pieces of art that came out of the conflict.